Now we'll show the second way to clean out a screen, more along the lines of if you're not going to be using the screen again. So after we clean it out, it'll pretty much be washed out with the emulsion remover or put in the dip tank. This would be using more of the screen wash and a wet wash of the screen rather than the press wash, which is a dry wash of the screen like you already saw. You still need to clean out the ink from the frame. So you can do that by using, once again, the ink knife, which is my personal favorite because it bends and flexes with the frame. This ink's been sitting in this frame quite a long time, so it's kind of thickened up a bit. Or you can use like an ink knife. Now, one thing to keep in mind whenever you're doing this process is you pretty much want to wear gloves at all times to avoid the ink on the fingers like you just saw me get. A nice little handy tool to have, or supply to have, is these Crazy Clean wipes. It's basically like an ink wipe that has, you saw it earlier in the video, but it's good to have in your darkroom and your clean out area for little spills like that. I wouldn't recommend cleaning frames with them, but it's great for the fingers. So we'll go ahead and put some gloves on. The other thing you want in your room when you're cleaning it out is some paper towels. These are some fairly inexpensive, cheap paper towels. They don't leave a lot of residue on the screen, but they're great to have in the darkroom area for both cleaning out the screen and in the press area. We're doing a press wash. So here's the use of the ink knife. Gets in the corners fairly easily. Allows you to scoop as much ink back into the frame. Now you want to keep as much ink out of the screen wash area because it's not good to go down the drain and you're throwing money away. Now I'll show the use of an ink card knife. This is nice because it has rounded edges and it gets in the corner of the screen, but it's not quite as easy to clean off. I'll use the combination of the both right here to clean the frame off. You want to keep your fingers as clean as possible during this process. The cleaner you keep your fingers, the cleaner you keep your area, the less mess you have to clean up later, which is always nice. I'm just scraping the ink off the frame like so. Once you're done cleaning the majority of the ink off the screen like this, the next thing we'll do is we'll take it into the washout sink and show you the wet wash of a screen. What we'll show right now is a wet screen wash using the ink degradant called Citra Paste. If you want the more environmentally friendly type of screen wash, you're going to be using Enviro Wash. What you'll need is the screen wash, or the Citra Paste, which is the ink degradant, and then also a scrub brush because this is a wet process. You'll probably want to start with the tape on the screen during this process. To start, we'll just get the screen wet. Then we'll spray the Citra Paste generously on the frame. Make sure your scrub brush has a little Citra Paste on it as well. Now this starts to degrade the ink. And as we scrub the frame with our scrub brush, you can see the ink easily degrade into the water. Scrub the sides of the frame, get all the ink off there. That's why it's so important to get as much ink off the screen as possible before you do this process, because you don't want a lot of ink going down the drain. Then we'll take our hose again and spray down the frame. Look how easy that cleans up. If we do a really quick clean like this, we can probably save the screen for future use. We don't necessarily have to reclaim it. Keep in mind that if you're doing this process a lot on a screen, you're using a lot of water. So if you want to use the screen over and over again for printing purposes, the more you use water on the screen, the more it degrades the emulsion. The emulsion will suck up the water, and if you use too much water, it will start to blow out. So that's why you might want to use your press wash upstairs in order to clean the screen out if you're going to be using it over and over again. But 1 or 2 times on this method of cleaning the screen out, you could continue to use the frame. If you are doing this and reusing the frame, or if it's going in the washout sink, you do want to take the tape off the screen. And that's what we'll do now. Notice if the screen is properly taped, it easily comes off in an organized fashion. If you try to reuse the screen with this tape on the screen, it does not work too easily. After the tape's off the screen, you also want to make sure your outside tape is off the frame as well. Taped off your registration marks. This needs to be all off the frame. And then finally, you want to make sure your ink is washed out of your image area and your registration marks. You can do this with your scrub brush, a little citric paste again. And then pressure definitely helps in this area, so we'll use the pressure washer. Now our screen is ready to reclaim. But before we go to the reclaiming process, we want to clean up. You want to wash out your ink degraded scrub pad. You can do this just with water, really fast and easily. Make sure that color of ink is out of the pad. And we'll put this back away. Then we want to wash down the washout sink. If you allow a lot of the ink residue to sit in the washout sink, it'll start to stain and gump up the sink. There we are. Next step, reclaiming the emulsion out of the screen. The reclaiming process, we're going to be using emulsion remover. Now there's a couple of different ways to reclaim a screen. We can use the manual process, which is using an emulsion remover and a scrub brush to scrub the emulsion out of the screen, and then using pressure to spray it out. You can also use a dip tank, which is a lot faster, quicker, and easier method, especially if you're doing high production and processing a lot of screens. We'll show the manual method first, and then the dip tank second. Now there's a couple different types of emulsion remover. There's the ER80, which is the super concentrate. It's what you probably got in your kit. There's also the Enviro strip, which is the environmentally friendly type of emulsion remover. And it's also the ER35, which is the more industrial strength emulsion remover, which a large shop would probably use. This one mixes 40:1, this one mixes basically straight out of the bottle, and this one you can mix up to 3:1, although a lot of people use it concentrated just by plugging in a spray nozzle directly into the bottle. Now these are all drain safe products, but the Enviro strip is the more environmentally friendly, natural type of product. We'll show using the ER80 because that's what most people got in their packages. ER80 mixes 1 container or 1 8-ounce container of ER80 into a gallon. Now we probably would recommend a little bit under mixing it so it's a little stronger. So what we'll do is we'll mix this into 3/4 of a gallon. What you can do is mix 1/3 of this into a spray bottle like this. A spray bottle like this that comes in your kit holds a quart, so 32 ounces. We'll take 1/3 of the emulsion remover and put it in there, the empty quart container, and then fill the rest up with water. Once we have water in our emulsion remover, you also want to clearly mark your containers. So with the Sharpie, we'll just put ER on this so we know what's in it in the future. So now let's get these two out of the way and start the removal process. One of the biggest keys to removing your emulsion properly is pressure. Both a concentrated emulsion remover will help, but without the proper pressure to blow the emulsion out of the screen, you could run into problems. Now, if you're using just a standard garden hose, you might reclaim your screen 1 or 2 times properly, but as that emulsion starts to build up, you'll have a very hard time reclaiming it all the way through. It's really to your advantage to get a pressure washer, even a small pressure washer, 900, 1000 PSI, 1100 PSI. You can pick them up for, about 60, 70 bucks, maybe $100. That really pays off in the long run, especially during the reclaiming process. If you don't have a pressure washer, you can take your screen down to like one of those car washes that have pressure washers at them and do the manual screen wash and reclaiming process there. What we'll do is we make sure our screen's wet. So we'll get the screen wet with a little bit of water like so, and then we'll spray the emulsion remover on both sides of the frame. Now generously spray the emulsion remover on both sides of the screen, allowing it to work its way into the emulsion. Next, we'll take our scrub brush and make sure our scrub brush has some emulsion remover in it. And then we'll scrub it in, start agitating the frame. You can already see the emulsion start to degrade. Once it's scrubbed in, we'll let it sit for about a minute. One thing you never want to do is allow the emulsion remover to dry on the screen. If the emulsion remover is allowed to dry on the screen, it chemically locks the screen, and then no amount of pressure will wash it out. So that is a big no-no and something you do not want to do. Now, depending on how your screen was coated to begin with, some areas of the screen may wash out easier than others. If you notice this area of the screen has a lot of emulsion on it, we're going to have to put a lot more scrubbing into this part of the screen and more pressure into that part of the screen to get this big clump of emulsion off the top of the frame. That's why properly coating your screens to begin with is much easier during the reclaiming process. Once your screen's allowed to sit for about a minute, minute and a half, you'll see your emulsion definitely dripping down your screen. Now what we'll show right now is how much of a difference it makes if you're using just a standard hose pressure like this or your pressure washer. We'll use the strongest setting on the hose nozzle, which is a jet. I'll start up here and show how the screen starts to wash out. A good thing to use in this process is a backlit washout sink. So we'll turn our backlights on right now. That way we can see what we're doing and we can make sure that all our emulsion is washing out of the screen. Now when you're washing out the screen, you can start from either the outside or the inside. Because most of the emulsion is on the outside of the frame versus washing it out when you're washing your image area out, sometimes it's easier to push against it and wash from the inside of the screen. So we can see it starting to wash out, and actually this little jet's doing a pretty good job. Look how much easier the pressure washer is. So much faster, a lot quicker and easier. Don't be afraid to ruin your screen mesh with a little bit of pressure. Now you might want to be careful if you're using a very, very powerful pressure washer like 300 or 3000 psi, but a little pressure washer like this, 1000, 1200 psi, is not going to ruin your screen. So you can get into your screen and get out stuck areas of emulsion. The more thoroughly you clean your screen, the easier it is and the longer it will last. If you leave chunks of emulsion on the outside of the screen, yeah, it won't affect your image area on the inside or center of your screen, but those start to build up over time and they make it hard to coat the screen. So if you're able to clean and thoroughly clean your screen properly each time, it'll last a lot longer and it'll be easier to use time after time. Hold it up to your light and make sure that all the emulsion is out. You have a couple specks on the inside here. That's not good, so we'll blow those out. And there we have it, a clean screen. You see those small specks that I easily blew out with the pressure washer? Those are the types of things that are hard to take out with a garden hose. So those will start to build up time after time. Like I said earlier, you might be able to clean your screen one or two times with a garden hose, but if you're going to be using it over and over and over again, it's definitely easier to use a power washer. From here, we can go to either dehazing the screen or degreasing the screen. This screen doesn't really need to be dehazed because it doesn't have a lot of ghosting in the image area. So what we'll show next is how to clean a screen using the dip tank and then also how to dehaze the screen. We'll now demonstrate how to reclaim a screen using the dip tank. Now a dip tank is a big tank that holds 2, 4, 6, or maybe even more screens. It has a degradant in the dip tank that basically degrades the emulsion and some ink out of the frame. What you want to do is you want to clean all the ink out of your screen and then basically do a screen wash like we demonstrated earlier before you put it in the dip tank. Your dip tank solution typically lasts about 6 months. Now if you're doing a lot of frames, if you're processing a lot of frames, it might last 4 or 5 months. But if you're keeping the ink out of your dip tank solution, it will last a lot longer than if you're putting a lot of ink residue in your dip tank solution. Sometimes after it starts to not clean the screen or become as effective as it does in the very beginning, you can put a little bit more concentrate in it and that'll kind of boost the quality of it back. The type of solution you'll mix in your dip tank is called Microwash 2, made by CCI. Now this mixes 10:1 with water, so this 5-gallon container will mix 50 gallons of dip tank solution. Typically, a dip tank this size will use about 4 gallons, so that'll give you an extra gallon to put back in the tank as it starts to become less effective around the 4 or 5 month period. Coming back to the screen over here, once we've cleaned our screen off and we've gotten all the ink and tape off the screen, we'll now put it in the tank. When you put your screen in the tank, you can typically put 2, 4, or 6 screens depending on the size of your tank. They all have caps to them that allow the screen to become submerged in the dip tank solution. We'll lock it down inside the tank, making sure the screen is completely submerged in the solution. Once in the tank, allow it to set for about 5 or 6 minutes. Do not let it set for an hour or 2 hours. We've even had people let them set overnight. What that does is it does the same thing the emulsion remover does. It gets into that screen and locks the chemical. It's also very bad for aluminum frames. Now keep in mind when you're using a dip tank, you should not use them on wood frames. The wood will definitely soak up the water and start to warp the frame a lot sooner than using the manual washout purpose. That's why it's optimal to use aluminum frames, because they're watertight and the dip tank solution won't affect them. Once your screen's allowed to soak for 5 to 6 minutes, take it out of the dip tank solution, put it back in the washout sink. Now we'll go directly to spraying this out. Once out of the dip tank, you should see either the emulsion really degraded like you see it here, or especially if it's a new dip tank solution, you probably won't see any emulsion on the screen at all and just have to do a quick clean of it. But either way, we're going to now spray it down with pressure. See how much easier that is? There's no scrubbing, there's no waiting a minute, 2 minutes to allow the emulsion remover to sit in. You just go straight to washing out the screen. Stuck areas of emulsion. And there it is. Now we've shown the emulsion removal process with both the manual emulsion removal and scrubbing it and the use of the dip tank. Next we'll go to dehazing the screen. Now as you can see, there's a ghost image or an ink stain in the screen. This is called a haze. A haze will happen over time, especially if a screen's been used a lot for printing. And the darker inks will haze the screens more too. Harsh inks like solvent inks and water-based inks will do a lot stronger haze than a plastisol ink, but they all leave somewhat of a haze. Now a standard haze, like a light haze like this, won't really affect the next image area. However, the darker haze that you see here, that actually has particles left in the screen, and this will affect the next image area. If any of our next image area came into any of this dark haze section, these particles would actually block out the next image, so it would either ruin it or not allow it to print properly. There's a few different products you can use as a dehazer. The one that comes in most kits is called Liquid Renew It. It's used in a concentrated form. The one that comes in the Enviro kits is called Enviro Haze. Now these are both very user-friendly, powerful but not super powerful dehazers. If you're doing industrial screen printing, especially if you're using a lot of solvent inks, a lot of people will use a paste like HC100. That's much more aggressive and much more caustic as well. The dehazer chemical is probably the most caustic of all the screen chemicals, so you want to be careful and follow the directions when you're using it. To use the dehazer, start out with a wet screen. Take your dehazer and spray it onto the wet screen. Dehazer is very thick, a lot thicker than other products like emulsion remover. Take a little dehazer and spray it on the scrub brush, and you want to use your dehazing scrub brush. And then work it in primarily into your hazed part of the image. Once it's worked into the hazed part of the image on both sides, work it over the rest of the screen. The great thing about using a dehazer, it's a one-step process. Once the screen is dehazed, you don't have to degrease it. So it does 2 in 1. Once it's mixed into the screen like that and agitated onto the frame, we'll allow it to sit for about 3 to 5 minutes. The harder the stain is, the longer you want it to sit. For this stain right here, we'll allow it to sit for 3 minutes. Once you've allowed your dehazer to work its way into the stain, we want to first flood the dehazer off the screen. Because the dehazer is caustic, we don't want to use a pressure washer and blow it right back into our face. Once you start hitting it with water, it starts to iodize in the air, and you can definitely smell it. It's got a fairly strong smell to it. So that's why rinsing it or flooding all the dehazer off the screen is good to do before you spray it with pressure. The screen's flooded. Now we'll take the pressure washer and power rinse it. You can see the haze come right out of the screen. Once your dehaze is rinsed out, you do want to do a final flush of the screen. Because the dehazer acts as a degreaser, you don't want to leave any residue left by the pressure washer on the frame. And then you can allow it to dry and recoat it for your next project. One final thing to go over once we're done using our washout sink, you do want to clean it, clean all your brushes out, and then rinse the washout sink down. If you get stuck parts of emulsion on your sink like this, dehazer works great for taking that off. Dehazer is a great product to use for cleaning out your washed-out sink and kind of getting all that emulsion residue and stain out. Dehazer is also very good to use for taking out stuck or tough areas of emulsion that won't come out during the standard emulsion remover process. Simply follow the instructions and use it the same way you would dehaze the screen on stuck areas of emulsion. It's also good to take tape residue off the screen like you see in this screen. So dehazer is a very generalized product that can be used for multiple purposes.